If this is the first time that you're here, the restrooms are across the hall. Buffet, of course, is a $10 buffet. And at the end, we always have to make sure we take all the food with us. So if it's out on the table, then feel free to take some with you for dinner or whatever. We have a time right at the beginning of the meeting where anybody has any announcements they would like to make. If you're going to make an announcement, I would like for you to make sure that you write down that announcement and get it to Peter right here on an index card so that he can include it into our newsletter. And if you want to be included in that newsletter, please make sure that you give Peter your email address, because that newsletter is everything that we're doing, everything that's coming up, and so therefore you get all the information that you need. So is there anyone that has an announcement? Mike.
There's an execution again, February 13th, and I sent around some flyers about it. This guy is from Cincinnati, and if you read his background on the back, it will make you sick about how we have failing children, not that what he did was okay. So if you feel like it, call the governor. Thanks.
If there's anybody here from northern Kentucky who would be willing to come out in an evening to support a little lobby group that's lobbying Mitch McConnell's aid to not make military the center of our foreign policy, and specifically not attack North Korea, see me afterwards.
And from the Cincinnati Educational Justice Coalition, next week is when Betsy DeVos will be our Secretary of Education for a year. And so there will be a report card that is presented to her next Wednesday. And a group of us from the Cincinnati Educational Justice Coalition will be going down and presenting that to Portman to show him who he supported. And we will also be going across the street to Brown's office too, because he did not support her, so they can see what happened. But on Monday, we'll be meeting with the Faith and Community Alliance and presenting some information on fair funding of schools. Tuesday, P.G. Sittenfeld will be here, and he'll be talking about his education policies in City Council. And then we'll have that report card. So, it's going to be a very busy week next week, and then of course then Thursday is our regular Cincinnati Educational Justice Coalition meeting at 6 o'clock at the Fire Museum. Okay. There was another announcement right here.
Tomorrow, Span Ohio Single Payer Action Network will be at the State House in Columbus at 10 a.m. when our state single payer bill is going to be talked about in the committee.
Everybody is welcome to that. Any more announcements? Oh, they come in late. So, without any more announcements, I'm going to turn this over to Dick and Caren Galloway. You know them well. They have been with us from the very beginning. They're going to be talking about Move to Amend, a very powerful movement at this time, because there's nothing out there that this doesn't touch. It touches education, it touches transportation, it touches healthcare, it touches everything that's going on out there. And so this is incredibly important. So Dick and Caren, it's all yours.
Thank you, Katie. You stole about half of what I have to say today. So we'll start out with just some casual remarks. Well, we hope that this room fills up much more than it is now, but we'll live with it. First, let me introduce and acknowledge Rob Weidenfeld, Dick Bozian, Deb, and Sid. Sid's not only the youngest member of Cincinnati, Greater Cincinnati Dems, he's also the youngest member of Greater Cincinnati Move to Amend. And we're counting on him to carry his weight. And my wife Caren, who is the brains of the outfit, and me, I'm the, I think I'm the, what do you call it? The inspiration. Well, that's kind. Okay. Other things that that we might announce, I'll go ahead and talk about these. We have lots of information and brochures. First of all, let me say that we're hoping, we've placed $1 million at every place, okay? We're hoping that this is enough to buy your support to get big money out of government. You may think there's something a little ironic about it, but there's, irony is a good way of catching people's attention. Literally, we bought $10 billion worth of these things, okay? We bought 10,000 of them. Our goal is to paper Cincinnati. So if, in any of these things, if you're willing to help us out and share them with your group, or when you go to the park or whatever, we have a gob of these. Okay, this is kind of a fairly brief but very informative trifold that we have in fairly large quantities for those who want those. We have a copy of the pro forma boilerplate resolution that can be passed by any organization. They've been taken to city councils and state legislatures and so forth. And then for those of you who really want to dive deep into the subject, we have these books. I've got a whole bunch of them. It includes the 10-year plan and a lot of the specific information. So that's just all background. We'll go ahead and get started then as soon as I get myself in order here, which is always a challenge.
Those mics up to your mouth.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Okay, first of all, hello, Greater Cincinnati Dems.
Hello.
Thank you for that greeting. And thank you, Liz, Alberta, and Katie, for creating this welcoming community. And for you, all of you, who are the area's key activists who come to share ideas about how to clean up our politics and our nation. Don't we all see it? The mood of the people is very clear, and it becomes clearer every day. It's time for a change, deep change. Our country is in the biggest crisis in a generation, and it doesn't have to be this way, and I think everybody in this room agrees with that. The people are insisting that the same old stuff from our government just doesn't work anymore, right? Despite our representatives' high-sounding promises, they are mostly owned by the corrupting influence of big money. And don't we know it? Is there a solution to these problems? Yes, we believe there is. And that's what we're going to discuss today. We can take our democracy back. Yes, democracy is built to promote change. How? By passing constitutional amendments. Our proposed amendment is to break the link between money and free speech and the personhood of corporations. Yes, ma'am. These two critical legal issues are what allows big money to own or control not just our governments, but more essentially our whole nation. Leaving either of these two legal issues out of an amendment will solve inches in a problem that's this big. It won't work, and that's one of the things that we want to address. Okay, so the next question is, are we alone in this effort? And the answer is no. Ever since Citizens United in 2010, all American voters are in a solid 80% majority. What other issue do you know that has run that high for that long? I can't name one. So it's there. And that's across the political spectrum, from Republican to Democrat to Independent. So please keep that in mind. Don't forget that. The people are already there. All we have to do is persuade them that with their help and their vote, Our votes will be the way we get from here to there. We've got to convey to the people again, our votes really do count. We've got to make our representatives do what we demand of them. That's what it's about. And after much research, we've come to believe that Move to Amend has the most comprehensive plan that's currently introduced in Congress. Making the 28th Amendment the permanent law of the land creates a level playing field. It will allow us to restore limits on the court that the courts have disallowed. This is the necessary floor on which we can begin to create and build solutions to all of our problems. Let me ask you this. What are the issues that most touch your heart? Stop and think about that a little bit. The issues that serve the public, the well-being of nations, education, universal health care, race relations, environment, and the list goes on, doesn't it? Now ask yourself, what is the biggest single barrier to making progress on each and every one of your favorite issues? Don't we know it's the power that gives power, don't we know it's the power it gives to a very small elite group who are able to shape national policy in their own self-interest without any regard for the rest of us? I think that's another thing we all agree on. So here's the thing. If we link getting big money out of our issues, then doesn't that help every issue? Isn't that a uniting factor for us all? Don't they go hand in hand? Don't they pull us out of our silos, our issue silos? More and more we recognize that we've got to do this if we're going to make big change. Together, we can become an irresistible force, making our candidates realize that they must hear what the people demand, or they'll lose our votes. Regardless of how much big money contributors throw to buy them, or if not them, their opponents, we've got to understand, they've got to understand, we will no longer be bought, period. And they won't last long if they can be bought, period. That's a really simple concept. All we need to do is act accordingly and speak accordingly. I like to say turn them around or we're going to turn them out. That's what's happening when society reaches a turning point, a tipping point. And that's something that I think a lot of people here have been expecting for years. I have. If you agree, we suggest you continue to follow your heart issue, your number one issue. But we hope that you will also make House Joint Resolution, the 28th Amendment, your number two issue. And remember that as we get the big money out, everything becomes easier for our issues. Almost everybody agrees that we've got to overturn Citizens United, and we've got to get money out of elections and reverse the money is free speech thing. But they miss many other critical issues, and the other issues are very important. Most other proposals use the word may regulate. Our proposal says shall regulate. You hear a difference? You know what a politician can do with that difference? Or they limit it to only the money which is involved in elections. That's a pretty small amount of things. Or they use unenforceable or vague language. We feel that Move to Amend strong concepts make all the difference in the world. We need constitutional principles with teeth, which allow us to regain the runaway inequality we now have. one that neither the politicians nor the courts can change on their whim. Move to Amend has a great start, but it's clear that we need everyone's support. Now is the time, and we can't afford to miss it. Just think of the mood of our country. See what we see with all these street actions and so forth that have sprung up. We have a huge opportunity. House Joint Resolution 48 has already been introduced in the House of Representatives with 52 sponsors. We're working on the Senate. That's a tougher nut to crack. We here in Cincinnati have been to seen Senator Brown's, Portsman's, and Chabot's staffs, asking them all to sponsor the amendment. It's important to remember that this is an issue we support, but we need to see it as a nonpartisan issue because we need the whole body of Americans to get this done. Now, the question is, when we went to see these representatives, we can say with some confidence they did hear and understand. We could tell that from their questions. Now, did they say yes? No. But they didn't say no. That's progress. Here's what we said to Senator Brown's aide. Can you see how helpful making big money the central issue in your campaign could directly combat the influence of the huge money the right wing is throwing at unseating you? He knows he's their number one target, and that's definitely true, no doubt. So suppose he became the prime sponsor in the Senate of House Joint, the correlated resolution, I'll get it right here sooner or later, in the Senate. So suppose he does that, and then he says something like this. And you know, if he gets the concept, he can say this with pizzazz. Okay? So suppose he says, do you want a candidate like my opponent who is owned by big money interest, or do you want a candidate who has always served the interest of the people? And I'm ready to take it to the next level. I've already introduced the same text as H.R. 48, H.J.R. 48 into the Senate, and we've already gotten X number of co-signers on this. And we're going to take big money out of government. With your help and your vote, we're going to change the way Washington works. Isn't that red meat the same red meat that Bernie addressed that brought out tens of thousands of people? We think so. So do you hear it? They will see, the public will see and reject the money being thrown at the opponents. We think that if Senator Brown and other candidates across the spectrum make this a key issue in their campaigns, one doing it with another doing it, will bring out support up and down the ballot, and that's important. So we're looking for motivating those tens of thousands of people who came out for the rallies of Bernie and unfortunately the Donald, but that's another issue we won't go into right at the moment. So that's what we've got to do to get the vote out. So we're going to turn to the video, Legalize Democracy. It's going to ask us to think about how much democracy we really have right now. And I think it's a question that's well worth considering carefully.
I'd like to say that the democracy in the United States of America is the mistaken belief that we actually practice one. Because democracy is not a noun, it's a verb. Demos means the people. Kratia means rule. So the word democracy from the Attic Greek means the people rule. And the trappings of democracy, you get to go and pull a lever every 2 to 4 years. Oh, only for candidates that have been pre-approved and pre-selected by the ruling elite. But when it comes to actually participating in a meaningful way in how our society is organized, you know, how much pay you might get, whether or not you get health care, whether this country goes to war or not, whether we should address the climate crisis, you know, those kinds of questions, we the people never have an opportunity to participate. Imagine if you will, the debate around health care had there not been elected officials with a commitment to pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. If the priority wasn't making sure there were profits for people that make drugs and sell drugs and people who provide medical care as insurers, if they weren't the priority and we were the priority, don't you think that would have been different? That's an immediate difference in your life. Right now, there are folks who are worried about Medicaid, Medicare. Would that be an issue at all if the priority wasn't, let's make sure there's enough profits for the corporations? I don't think so.
The prison system, along with the education system and the healthcare system, are 3 things, amongst many others, that I believe should never have a profit motive attached. The Corrections Corporation of America has been going around the states in 2012 and 2013 and asking states that are cash-strapped in their budget, hey, we'll take over your prisons. One of the stipulations is that if we take over your prisons for you, we'll pay you for them and we'll give you money, but you gotta keep them at 90% capacity. And that basically attaches a profit motive to criminalizing American citizens.
The democratic self-government experiment that was started in the United States over 200 years ago has gotten completely corrupted.
We are not being listened to. We, the real people, are not being listened to.
It's when people say we can buy elections, which we've seen happening, and when we see people say we don't want to let people vote, those are all little signs, that pretty big signs that our democracy is in trouble.
The move to AMEND's amendment that we're promoting will basically break the iron grip that wealthy individuals and corporations have over our democracy and allow the people to rule as they're supposed to.
Today, we have an un-American attack on that dream of equality. You can't be free if you don't have a home. It's time for an intervention, y'all. Money is not political speech.
I wasn't really planning on holding the mic over there. Okay, so the next thing shows how over a period of 2 centuries, the Supreme Court progressively legislated from the bench. Now, you know what conservatives think about that. In favor of corporations. This is why it is important to put the personhood of corporations in the amendment we pass.
When considering the still unfolding history of these United States, the words of journalist Molly Ivins ring true. It is possible to read the history of this country as one long struggle to extend the liberties established in our Constitution to everyone in America. In other words, who, according to our laws and culture, gets to be considered a person? The law creates legal personhood, and movements create law and change culture. So, how have the courts passed laws to shape our culture? That history goes way back before Citizens United. 1819, Dartmouth College versus Woodward, Supreme Court case, turned a corporate charter from a government-granted charter to a contract. This ruling gave corporations standing within the Constitution. 1886, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Though the court did not rule on corporate personhood, the decision was subsequently cited as a precedent to hold that a private corporation is entitled to the same 14th Amendment rights of due process and equal protection as human beings. This makes it impossible for us to make laws that treat local businesses any differently than giant multinational corporations, even if their business practices are deemed to be harmful to workers, the environment and communities, or if they have a history of violating the law. Hale versus Henkel, 1906. The court granted corporations the Fourth Amendment search and seizure protection. Dodge versus Ford Motor Company, 1919. The Michigan Supreme Court says, business corporation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of the stockholders. Stockholder primacy is established. The purpose of the corporation, according to the court, is no longer to serve the public good, as it had been. It is now to maximize profit for shareholders above all else. Pennsylvania Coal Company versus Mahon, 1922. Corporations get the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause, meaning if you pass a regulation that impacts a corporation's ability to make a profit, that is deemed a taking, and they can sue for the right to future profits lost. This creates a chilling effect, and local and state governments become much more hesitant to pass laws in the public interest for fear that corporations can claim loss of potential profits that cities and states will be on the hook to pay. Buckley versus Vallejo, 1976. The Supreme Court rules that spending money to influence elections is protected under the First Amendment, in effect saying that money is speech. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, 2010.
Today, the Supreme Court of Chief Justice John Roberts declared that because of the alchemy of its 19th century predecessors in deciding that corporations had all the rights of people, many restrictions on how these corporate beings spend their money on political advertising are unconstitutional.
The court's ruling threatens to undermine the integrity of elected institutions across the nation. It's a rejection of the common sense of the American people.
Move to Amend is the only organization right now that is very clear on what needs to be done with respect to the constitutional amendment. Specifically, we declare, or we want declared that corporations are not people. And we also want to declare that money is not speech. In every other organizations, they're mostly concentrated on Citizens United, money is not speech. To that, we always have to ask a question. How much better was our politics pre-Citizens United? Not much better. And the reason it wasn't better is that second portion was missing, corporate personhood.
It is clear that this country is suffering from a crisis that is deeper than the economic crisis or the ecological crisis. We are suffering from a crisis of democracy. And I say that because there are supermajorities on issue after issue, whether you're talking about healthcare, foreign policy, economic questions, education, or political reform, that clearly support substantive reforms, yet those reforms have not come into effect.
Every single one of our fundamental human needs are being violated on a daily basis. And until we get democracy back in this country, through overturning Citizens United and overturning corporate constitutional rights, we're not going to have a democracy that can function for the 300 million plus human beings in our United States.
I've been watching it for some 30 years now, but I never really felt like I needed to do anything about it until Citizens United.
We should be in the Capitol throwing all the lobbyists out, meeting with our congresspeople and telling them what we would like them to do to make this a better country.
If we, the people, don't do something about corporate constitutional rights, that not only our government, the United States of America, is going to be on our knees, but we are going to take entirely with this.
That's vertical and more horizontal. And the horizontal there is focusing on a democracy movement that will help all of us achieve the individual solutions we want.
Every other issue that I care about, whether it be the climate, whether it be workers' rights, whether it be education for our children, whatever it is, it tends to be very hard to get things done without these kinds of reforms. Because the people who write the checks You know, the ones who are prowling around in the state capitol with their, you know, fat checkbooks and their nice suits, they're the ones that get the legislators' ears.
There's going to be considerable opposition, and there's going to be opposition within the corporate media, and strong opposition, which is going to make the job a little harder. But never underestimate the power of the people when they understand the message. Never underestimate that. I think that this is something that can be done quite quickly. I think it's something that can be done rather efficiently. It's just going to require a large enough parade. It's going to require a large enough people to understand the core concepts. And that's the real work that we have to do right now, is hit that critical tipping point, which is probably around 20 or 30% of the voting populace actually understanding the issue.
And a big part of the issue when creating a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy movement is an understanding of how race and racism were constructed in the United States through law, and how those laws informed our culture in much the same way those corporate rights have been constructed through the law to ensure rule of the wealthy minority over the majority, and how our culture reinforces and legitimizes that lack of democracy. Right from the very beginning, Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution defined people as property. You see, the authors of the Constitution were very interested in protecting their property, including slaves. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall...
Could you come over and hold the microphone? So in our next segment, I ask you please to pay special attention to the part of the speech by President Roosevelt. I'm sorry that it's hard to hear. The sound quality is not good. The main point, we're having a real sound problem today, aren't we? The main point is that the New Deal, which FDR created, included all the things that are now being called socialist or worse. And most of them have been limited or reversed ever since Reagan. These are the policies that pulled us out of the Great Depression and led us to one of the largest boom times ever. They all served the public good. They did not turn us into socialists or commies, although others would argue that point. They built our country up and they created good paying jobs. No, they were not.
And the war on drugs declared by Richard Nixon violently targets and imprisons people of color disproportionately through today.
Righteous anger can only be provoked by anger at injustice or unfairness. And I'm angry about the fact that we've got 20 to 25% of the children in the richest country in the world who go to bed hungry or undernourished every night. I'm angry about the fact that we have transnational corporations that are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself. And I'm angry about the fact that the world that's being created with the rape and plunder of Mother Earth is a racist, sexist, and class-aggressive society. You bet I'm angry. I'm angry because it doesn't have to be this way.
Are we in a class war right now? Of course we are. And, you know, Warren Buffett, I think, said it the clearest. He said, we're in a class war, and we've been in a class war for years, and my class is winning. And who is his class? The owning class, the people who own these corporations.
In our day, certain economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. The Second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.
Justice Douglas, the greatest champion of the First Amendment that this country has ever known, once said that the Bill of Rights is a badge which says, "To government you shall go no further." What is the impact of corporations wearing that badge?
Because after 106 years in America, through the best of times and the darkest of hours, she knows how America can change. Yes, we can. America, we have come so far. We have seen so much, but there's so much more to do. So tonight, let us ask ourselves, if our children should live to see the next century, if my daughters should be so lucky to live as long as Ann Nixon Cooper, what change will they see? What progress will we have made?
The second thing that I think happened that we'll look back on and understand this as a critical moment is that we elected a president through a lot of grassroots effort. The young people in this country really made a historic difference electing a black president with a huge amount of hope. And I think that their expectations were not met. The system itself was a failure.
That's why it's really critical that we do more and we not just wait for elected officials to take care of this for us. This is what every single social movement that has come before us has done when they recognize that the system is really flawed and it's not working and the people in power are not going to self-correct. That it's time for the people to step in, and there's actually a process in our Constitution to do this. This isn't new. It doesn't happen very often. But whenever there's a system that is so out of balance, we've seen people's movements come together and respond by inserting human rights or correcting the issue to make clear that the priority needs to be on the people.
There is another history of the United States, and this is where you come in. This is the history of people coming together and rising up to change laws and change the culture. In 1791, Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution were adopted to protect we the people from the excesses of government. At the time, we the people protections only extended to white male property owners. 1865, 13th Amendment, slavery abolished. Civil Rights Act of 1866.
Pardon, hello? Turn it on. Pardon. I managed to break anything that's electronic, and pardon us if we're not real slick on our first presentation of this type.
Can't hear.
Can't hear?
No.
So this is our first presentation of this type. I have the unusual ability to curse anything electronic, so please bear with us.
Somehow remain a good man. And how many times must good parents cry? 'Cause their little ones must sleep in a van. How many bribes can corporations give before their bribes are?
That this was the great that we the people agreed that this was the great American experiment that people, rather than being ruled by the wealthy or the aristocrats, and we chose to have the people rule, to check or limit the power of government, to limit the power of the wealthy, to hold down the masses.
If you're not seeing the kind of change you want,
I'd say ask yourself why you're not getting that. And chances are very good it has to do with the fact that our democracy is not working for the people. So whatever your number one issue is, you should make this your number two. Because without this kind of change, it's going to be very hard to win the other reforms that we all want.
An issue that I think people used to think was too complicated for regular people to understand. And when it's in front of them, they're voting, not just 50% plus one, not even just 55%, not even just 60%, but 70, sometimes even over 80% in support of calling for an amendment. I think that's one thing that definitely proves that there's no question where people stand on this.
The reality is that this is a vital struggle. If Move to Amend doesn't succeed, then we will continue to live in a society in which corporations call the shots, both in our courts and the halls of Congress and the executive branch, and increasingly at the state and local level. And we've already seen the consequences of that.
So I actually think that right now it's really a world historical kind of a moment, but I even think that beyond the amendment, it's so much broader than that. We're really not just talking about an amendment that gets rid of corporations. We're talking about a completely new way of understanding what democracy is, why it's important, and how our economic systems globally will need to be reconstructed.
We got to build a movement step by step, intentionally and deliberately, to create the world that we want. And that means it needs to be social, it needs to be political, it needs to be economic, and ultimately we need a legal system that codifies under law a peaceful, just, democratic, and sustainable world. And when you talk about it that way, no. When I talk about it that way, I can have that conversation at an Occupy encampment, I can have that conversation at a Tea Party rally, I can have that conversation at a pool hall or a bowling alley. And ordinary Americans agree with me. Not on everything, but on the fact that something's not right and it doesn't have to be this way. That's where the agreement is, and that's the sweet spot of real solidarity.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to save time at the end for questions and answers, which is why we did cut out a couple of sections that we didn't think were the most informative. So at this point, we want to point out that we have amended the Constitution 27 times. We have solved some very difficult issues through amendments. And history shows that we got many reforms we sought, even though we didn't pass the amendment on which they would have been based. Said saying hi to me. But I want to give you the greatest example of all. Few people understand that it took only about 50 years from the advent of the abolitionist movement in our country until slavery was abolished. Slavery, a moral abomination that has existed for over 10,000 years and in every culture in history. Now, if we can do that in 50 years, then we ought to be able to finish this task. What do you think? 2 weeks? 3 weeks? Sometimes I'm an optimist. So what we want to, yes, there we go. Here, we think that this is the winning political strategy. It's where 80% of the people already are. If we don't tap that energy, then there's something wrong with us. That energy is there, they're with us, they're becoming progressively vocal, and what we need to do is, again, stay with your number one issue, but let's join together on this issue, democracy and making the amendment, and we will be able to bring some serious change. So, the time is now, and we sure don't want to miss it while the mood is there. You probably can guess that other than the millions of dollars that I passed out around the room today, you probably can guess that we don't take big corporations' contributions. So we'll say If you feel this, we would appreciate your contributions, but we don't want to take a dime from your number one issue, in my opinion, okay? And in my opinion, it's your support in sharing the word and so forth that I think is the most important contribution. Okay, so how far have we gotten? We've gotten over 540 endorsing organizations, including our Harmony UU Church. Passed it with unanimously after 10 minutes. We have 446,000 individuals who have signed our petition. And if you signed this, the clipboards that are going around, that will be signing the petition as well. And then there are many other things. We have many cities and states that have passed resolutions and even a few ballot initiatives. Questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's open it up.
Okay. Okay, so questions?
I understand that there's almost half of the states have passed that they want to have a constitutional convention. And I was wondering what Plan B is for if that does happen, where Move to Amend sees themselves going with the constitutional convention.
That's a bigger number than I've heard, but I know that it's happening. Rob, you want to take the mic? You want to handle the mic?
No, I have a question.
Oh.
Well, Anthony first.
Yeah. We are a little leery about a constitutional convention because you know what big money's going to try to do. They are going to sponsor every candidate they can get in that convention. It's going to be a free ride for them, and they're going to know exactly what they want to do and what they accomplish, and they know the money will stop flowing if they don't do what their masters say. So we're concerned about that. Possibly, in the right environment, we could overcome that. But probably by far the best bet is to be so far ahead with this amendment, and this is where a lot of people don't understand. We live in a representative democracy. If we want an amendment to pass, we have got to get our legislators, both at the national and at the state level, to pass it. So it's going to take a people movement. It's going to take a lot of energy, but we got to make it. Okay, your question.
I'm wondering about the timeline. I'm a little confused about what has to happen to get this passed. Is it a ballot initiative? What has to happen state by state and nationally? You have to get a. I'm a little confused.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you know the exact numbers?
I don't know the exact numbers, but what I will say is, first thing we have to do is get enough support from the Senate and representatives to get it on the ballot. Okay, then there's a certain percentage of states that have to vote for it. Those are the numbers I don't know, but that's the.
I don't think there's a ballot involved.
No, there's not.
Amend the Constitution.
It's got to either be initiated by a constitutional convention or by being passed in both the House and the Senate by, I think, 2/3 majority, I believe. And then it's got to go to the states, and then they have to be ratified in the state legislature. Again, 2/3. 2/3 vote of 3/4 of the states. Is that how it goes?
I believe it also can go the other way, that it can start in the states.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then go to Congress. But
This is the way it has been done, I think, each and every time in history. Peter?
Yes, I was hoping you would give a plug to Jane Mayer's Dark Money. I mean, I am literally here solely because of that book, which spells out exactly how the fossil fuel billionaires use cynical public relations people to take over at the most local level and build up right to the gerrymandering at the higher levels. It's the greatest argument for local politics that I've come across.
Let me just say that if you aren't ready yet to run out to the bookstore and buy it, ask him to email you a copy of his synopsis of the book. He's got it down to about 3 pages, and it's really, it turns you around.
So, I don't wish to be a spanner in the works here, but I do want to mention that I assume Move to Amend is now a 501c3 corporation?
Correct. Yes.
No, it's not.
It's a
501c4.
C4.
They also have a 501c3 for their education fund.
Okay, so Citizens United is a 501c3 too, a small corporation, and not a giant commercial corporation. And so the point of the Citizens United ruling by the court affected was it was supposed to support small corporations, including nonprofits, like Citizens United, like the American Civil Liberties Union, presumably like Move to Amend, to have political speech. It's not about supporting campaigns or candidates, as it's often represented to be. It's about, for instance, taking out an ad in the newspaper, that supports a political point of view. And it's been constantly represented as though it's giving money to candidates or campaigns. It isn't. There are protections and limits on what anybody can give to campaigns and candidates, including corporations. And the biggest money actually that comes to these kinds of political speech come from very wealthy individuals, not corporations anyway. So there's, and super PACs and stuff. So my personal feeling is that a change in the Constitution is what is often called the nuclear option. And it's one that I like to think of as the last ditch. So I would love to see major electoral reform. I would love to see an even playing field. I would love to see every candidate get the same amount of money, and that's it. And so, but I'm not convinced about a constitutional amendment.
You made a bunch of very, very good points. Excuse me. The way that I've typically seen Citizens United is it opened the last floodgate to big money. Now, there may have been other intentions of the people who put it together, but unless I'm sorely mistaken, I believe it was funded mostly by the Koch brothers, and that they did have a very, very conservative agenda to achieve. So some of the language may sound really sweet and sound like, oh, that's very American, very positive, but aren't they good at kind of taking whatever they want and make it sound like apple pie?
I forgot one other important point. Citizens United was not just about corporations, it was also protecting the political speech of unions. It's about unions and corporations.
Yes, thank you. That's another good one. Now, this, of course, is not every union member or every union organization, but the thing is that we can't beat big money with money. A corporation or the wealthy people can throw so much money so fast that it really is very much in the favor of unions and other groups. All kinds of the 501c3, 501c4 organizations to have a limit on how much money they can throw in. I have a bunch of examples on that, but I'm not going to bother with them right now. Janet.
Yes, I just wanted to say one thing. If you vote for those candidates for the House and the Senate who have signed the contract, there's something called candidates with a contract, and there's only 55 of us. I just checked it. I thought there would be so much more by this time. I signed a long time ago. Candidates with a contract, are going to go to Congress and overturn Citizens United, to end partisan gerrymandering, and there's a few other things as well. Fairness in the work week of Congress and fairness in pay. There's only 55 of us, only 3 of us in Ohio. Sherrod Brown hasn't signed it. Your other, Sam Ronan and I and one other candidate in Ohio have signed, are candidates with the contract. So I would say that take a look to see who those candidates are that this is important to.
And isn't Janet exactly?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Janet Everhart, running for Congress in the 2nd District, sorry.
And isn't Janet just the kind of representative we would like to have to represent we the people? Who else?
I think one of the things, let me just add one, yes, thank you. One of the things I wanted to add is if you read the dissenting opinion of the justices, obviously, who were against it, one of the predictions they made is the situation we have now, that it would open the floodgates and money would really be...
More money.
What money? What floodgates? Well, because of the dark money aspect of it, and I mean, yeah, so people are pouring money into the super PACs. That's where the money is going, and that's what's supporting the candidates, and that's where the control is. I think if you've got a candidate standing up in front of TV cameras and saying, I have to pay for the tax bill, my donor told me I had to, or they're not going to give me any more money, that's scary that you're willing to say that right out loud.
Just something that I was shocked about when I heard is that congressional members of Congress spend 2 full days a week in Washington on the phone seeking donations. Their part-time job is that we're paying them for. We're paying them to go up there and work 2 days a week to get money for their campaigns. Something's wrong, and it's a shocking amount of time and energy going to beg for money for their campaigns. And they don't have a choice, because they're not going to win without the money.
So there must be questions other than from the power table here.
I just want to say that I agree with what William said, that corporations aren't the only source. And frankly, if we're going to get support from the other side of the aisle, we have to acknowledge that, for example, labor unions put a great deal of money into elections. And probably not nearly as much as corporations, but our interest needs to be, we need to get the money out of politics, no matter who is trying to influence. And yes, there are limits in some areas, William, but not in all areas. And of course, what's the most devious part of money, the dark money, is that Citizens United allowed it to come from unnamed sources. So we don't even know who is supporting the candidates because they don't have to reveal it. I think the basic notion is an excess amount of money in politics is a corrupting influence, and I think that Move to Amend is trying to address that.
Thank you. We need to wrap it up now. One more question. Who has not spoken yet that would like? There you go.
I support the change, but my question is, does it have to be a constitutional amendment?
That's a wonderful question. Until about a year ago in the fall, I had spent 9 years promoting the notion that all of this could be done with an act of Congress that says the Constitution neither states nor implies a link between money and speech, therefore none exists. The court was wrong, okay? That is called creating a crisis of jurisdiction. It's been used many times, and it really, the Supreme Court now has to defend itself against the point of view of the people coming before them. I believe that right up to the point that my wife found Move to Amend online. it did not take them very long to convince me the thing about, even if we pass it, think about what they've done with all the reforms of FDR's New Deal and so forth, the controls on banking, the controls on monopolies, all of these things, they're laws. And so when the other side came in, they just kicked them all out. They underfunded so that different branches of government can't do the job that they're supposed to do, and the list goes on. So I sure wish, and yet I will also say that maybe it would be a good idea to put that in the works, because it would be a very educational process.
Well, I'm concerned because there was an attempt to amend the Constitution for the Equal Rights Amendment, which was never adopted. So is there a plan B? If a constitutional amendment, the move to amend fails, then what's plan B? We can't wait 50 years for this.
Preach it. I absolutely agree. At my age, I don't want to wait 10 years for this, but we do have a 10-year plan. And with the mood of the country, we're actually a little ahead of our plan. It's all spelled out. It's in the blue book for those of you who are very, very interested. We've got the bigger book that describes these things. But yes, so we didn't get ERA, and it broke my heart, and it probably broke a lot of hearts in this room. But given that, we still changed so much of the way things were. Not where we wanted to get them, but sometimes after our best effort, we have to look at it and say, well, what we got is important, and it's better than what we started with. So I think by working for the amendment itself, and possibly trying to do it through legislation, both will work to educate the public and build support. Thank you all for your questions. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for letting us present what we think is a very important issue. Thank you. And just one other thing is, I don't know about the other members of our leadership team. I'm willing to stay here as long as there are people who want to discuss it, so don't be shy.
Don't forget, we've got food that needs to be, containers need to be emptied, so fill up your take-home containers on your way out the door. I want to remind you that tonight, Dr. Laura Weaver is having a town hall at the Esquire Theater on Ludlow. And if anybody would like to sign a petition for Cordray, in the back of the room, we have petitions that for his run for governor. Next week is PG Sittenfeld.
Hi, I've been working with Move to Amend. I just wanted to let people know, besides if you want to stay after and ask a question, I'm more than happy to try to answer those, even with Sid's help. But there are clipboards around the tables, and if you're interested in signing the petition, if you sign those clipboards and fill out the information, that will add to the tally, which if you go to the national website, it has the list of 446,000 people, and the number keeps clicking up every time we add a name. So if you're interested in signing, you could do that, or you could also take the time to learn a little bit more on the national website, and you can also sign it online from the national website. So either way. So thanks so much for coming and listening. Thanks.
See you next week. PG Sittenfeld will be here, and he will be talking about his run for city council, also educational issues, because it is Education Week. Thank you.
Socialism, in my view, they were democracy working the way they should, aren't they? This is what democracy looks like. I like that chant. This is what democracy looks like.